We have a very interesting and unusual program for you this afternoon, but to get the most out of it, I have to give you a bit of background. When this organization of Social Work Heritage was founded, George and I were discussing it. We can't agree whether it was 79 or 80, but early on we identified several sources of material for the archives. First among them that we were lucky to begin with was the collection of papers from distinguished people in the community who had made outstanding contributions and were kind enough to give us their files. Out of that material, we have received invaluable journals, out-of-print books, unpublished papers, and other memorabilia that we are delighted to have. This project has moved along rather steadily, and I think with your help and by helping us circulate in the community that we are interested in such material, I think it's a self-starter, and we are pleased to report success. Our second source of material was the invaluable archives, but they didn't think of them as archives, of agencies. Buried in agency files is a tremendous, rich vein of material historically related to this community. But we have not been so lucky in getting that kind of material. The part of the problem has been the innumerable agencies, a small board, and we do hope to make it one of our major projects for the forthcoming year. And I look out on this audience this afternoon, and we're going to invite you to be a living index to what's buried in those files. I would like to call your attention to this brochure that we're very pleased to have, and our chairman modestly neglected to say that her husband contributed a great deal to getting it done. We're a resourceful board. We call on anybody we can catch. In the meantime, our experience in collecting material from agencies has not been an easy one, as I said. A couple of us have tried it, and I'd like to give you a brief example of what we encountered. It was easy enough to get an appointment with an agency executive. We got there. We were very well received. They endorsed our program. And then when I said, let us look to what you've got in your archives, I've never seen such glazed looks in anybody's eyes. It's my experience from having once been an agency administrator that the last thing you have time for is to look in the closed files. They are there. They take space. They are keeping some volunteer or another worker from sitting down. And you worry about them, but you seldom dig in them. Now, and I was looking at one executive whom I happened to have been on his board and I knew had done extraordinary work in starting a very innovative program in the field for the aged about 20 years ago. I tried to talk about it. Perhaps it's the pressure of today's needs. Perhaps it's the decrease in resources, but it is a blank. We don't have archival material. I finally looked at him and I said, I really wasn't expecting to get a draft of the Elizabethan Poor Law or even a bundle of Mary Richmond's unpublished letters. What about the material you did here? Oh, the lady that did that retired. I'm not sure. I know it's there, but I don't know how to find it. Now, if we're going to get it, we're going to have to ask you to be a living index for us, because people here have either are now currently or have been recently involved as an employee or as a volunteer in an agency, and you've got to help us find it. We have a brochure now that does a better job of defining what is archival material, and I'd like for you to review it. We're going to call on you again. Our third source of material that we early on identified was the oral history. In the living memory of many people in this room and in the community lies a vast reservoir of material of tremendous interest. It is a matter of recording it. Now here I'm happy to report that we have been more successful. We finally got the equipment, we got underway, and as of now, I counted up and I think we have 12 oral histories. They last anywhere from an hour to 3 hours. You'll be pleased to know that we have an oral history by Zdenka Bubin and by Dean Arlene Johnson. We have scheduled 17 oral histories to be completed sometime this summer. And I want to warn you that we have a little malice aforethought in this program this afternoon. Your name may be on the list, and if it is not, you may be asked to do some interviewing for us out of your area of expertise in the field we're interested in. Now, I'm sure if you got a group of social workers to get up and say one of their best skills, the first thing they would announce is that they know how to do interviewing, or at least they think they do. But I dare say that few of us have ever interviewed for the record, for history. And I think it takes a very special skill. And this program wasn't accidental, because I am listed to be an interviewer. And before I reveal myself not knowing how to go about it, I thought we'd have a demonstration this afternoon. So we have asked that an oral interview that has already had 3 hours of taping, that they give us another segment of taping. And we are not sure what the subject is. We do not know what they're going to say. But we all do know that, such as it is with us that grow older, when we review our history, it seems to have happened only yesterday. The program this afternoon is an interview, a continuing interview by Elizabeth McBroom, known to all of you as a distinguished social work educator, editor of the social work papers, and I think has taught about every course I ever heard of along the line in practice and human growth. She will be continuing her interview with John Milner, and John Milner, again, hardly needs an introduction here, but he says I may say that he's been at this business over 50 years. As student, practitioner, social work educator, participant in conferences innumerable in institute, and perhaps the thing I think most of is the definer of the content and the methods of intervention in the field of child welfare. I'm going to call on them. The program is theirs. Let us see what happened only yesterday. John, Elisa, the program is yours.
Before we start, Dr. Hamovich has suggested that I bring you some good news, that our next dean has been appointed. It's Dr. Rino Patti. Been on the faculty at the University of Washington for many years. He's a graduate of our own school, both his degrees from our school. His wife is a graduate of our school. So next year when you come, you'll see a picture of the sixth dean on our wall. This is an unrehearsed interview. I don't know what I'll be asked, and I'm not sure what I'm going to answer.
John, you came to Los Angeles to live and work for the first time in 1946, just fresh out of the Army, and that some ways seems like only yesterday, but we know it has been time for 2 generations of children to be born and grow to maturity, and there have been lots of changes. And I wonder if you'd start by telling us something about how the city looked when you arrived here in 1946.
I have to have a long time memory for that. I remember first coming on the campus. Arlene Johnson had wired me when I was in the Army asking if I would come on faculty, and I was very unsure I wanted to teach. So one of the first places I came was to the campus when I was out of the Army. And I felt like I really stepped back in time in a way. It was a very quiescent, passive kind of campus. It didn't seem to me to have been much affected by the war. The main buildings were all on Child's Way, and there was a hot dog stand on Child's Way and a Phelps Welker store, which had a different name at that time, on Child's Way, and a malt shop. And the only buildings off were, I think, the gymnasium and one or two other buildings, the Elizabeth von Kleinsmith building. The faculty met with me the first day, and the only eating place was a table in the corner of the big banquet hall behind Elizabeth von Kleinsmith Hall. The thing I remember particularly was kind of the elegance of the administration building, where Dr. von Kleinsmith, who was president, had his offices. They were furnished in French antiques that were gifts of the Adams family. I'm correct on that. And many art objects in the hallway, oriental objects that were very valuable, not been destroyed in any way, in spite of all the traffic in the building. The rooms were formally outfitted, and it was a place where Arlene Johnson loved to hold teas. And that was the main entertainment in those days, of coming to a tea party, even in spite of a lot of complaints from agencies that this was not the most exciting entertainment. And I remember Arlene always worried that Dick Mudhurst at a little later time and I were going to spike the punch to liven up the place. And I'm not saying that we didn't. If we wanted to entertain there, we could ask the secretary of the president, Dr. von Kleinschmidt, who was himself really a elegant man, I think the last of the Victorians. He would arrive each morning with his morning coat on and gray trousers and a Somberg hat, and a chauffeur would bring him to the door and he would come in. So if we wanted to entertain, we approached his secretary, and if we'd behaved ourselves well during the year, she would bring out the best china that had been left to the university by wealthy families and the best of silver, and we would treat it in style. So this was kind of a atmosphere of the university, it felt to me at the time. But I could see the clouds of Army coming, that within a very short time we would be a campus with many, many veterans coming. And there was some preparation for that, the moving on of some temporary buildings to be used as classrooms. And I knew that the whole atmosphere of the school would change. Not only our school, but the schools throughout the university. An example, there was a policy that there could be no smoking in any building on the campus. A year later, you could hardly see in the classrooms. They were filled with veterans. When I first came, there were almost all women students. Within a year or so, we had over 51% male students in the School of Social Work, so that you started to see major changes occurring. Within the community itself, I observed practices that today seem very dated. An example, at the California Children's Home Society, babies were kept in the agency that was on Adams Avenue in an old colonial house. Babies were kept in those cribs for many months before adoption ever took place. They were studied in every possible way, and the policy of the staff was to hold the child until they could scientifically match them to adoptive parents, so that there were pictures pasted all over the walls of babies and of parents, and if they could find some that looked alike, that was one factor for placing in that with that particular family. The adoption process was a very slow one, and at a later time, an adoption committee with the Welfare Council here worked to change policies so that adoptions were stepped up a great deal. And the adoption of older children was very limited at the time. It was just one example of agency practice. Children's institutions were in most ways dated. I think the most progressive institution at the time was Vista Del Mar, which had been the first institution in the country to establish the cottage system, children. But McKinley Home, Donald Pitts is here, brought 3 pictures of McKinley Home that are on the table here. McKinley Home was still housed out in the valley with 4 large dormitories with a large number of children living in each building, I think 60-some in each of the buildings, and stayed there until it was converted into a shopping center, and the McKinley built new quarters on the east side of the city. That the practices within institutions were quite dated. The Catholic orphanage was still in existence, almost a medieval type of orphanage. There were programs that were limited in their specializations, like Jewish Big Brothers, which eventually expanded a great deal. And you started to see the beginnings of what we now have, of agencies expanding to their programs, and agencies starting to really develop services that were currently needed for the veterans. And one was the Veteran Psychiatric Clinic, where I used to volunteer.
John, everybody in this room, I think, knows that you taught here in the School of Social Work for, was it 31 years, and that you were a great teacher. And let's talk today a little more about some of your extracurricular activities during these years. And I think very early you went out on statewide barnstorming with the California Youth Authority. Could you tell us about that adventure?
Yes, the school at that time had a very special interest in the correctional field. And this is something that I think has been lost in recent years. But we tended to have students placed in corrections, in probation, and in some of the institutional programs, which were, I think, good learning opportunities for youngsters. But the California Youth Authority was established, and Heman Stark headed the Youth Authority, and Carl Holton also participated in the Youth Authority. And he was chief probation officer here in Los Angeles, and very loyal to social workers, and a close friend of the schools, and particularly of Ruby Enlows. And so he was most helpful to us in the placement of our students and so forth. But I was asked to go with a driver and be taken to every youth authority facility in the state and conduct training sessions. And it was quite an experience. They didn't take me to every one of them. They avoided those that dealt with girls. And there was a great prejudice against any of the programs for girls. And it took a long time for the women's programs, the girls' programs, to develop. That you saw a great irregularity in the kinds of programs within the states. Some were very progressive. Some of the county institutions that were correctional institutions were highly progressive. The one at Riverside County, which was started by a man who was a half-breed Indian and had been an alcoholic at one time, a highly creative man, started this program in which the youngsters themselves built the entire correctional institution, which is a ranch leading up into the mountains in Riverside County. And the very fact that they created their own community made it a very progressive program. They didn't hire social workers. The people who lived with the youngsters were all tradesmen, carpenters, electricians, farmers, so forth. And the man had many innovative ideas that I thought were adaptable to other places, but it was difficult to get them into effect in our state institutions because they were already established practices and how they should operate. And I think in California we've had a number of highly creative programs that dealt with problems of this sort, and often the best learning out of them has never been transferred into general practice.
Still in the corrections field, I think early on you were identified with DCI here on the campus, and branching out from campus to the DCI's operations in Arizona and in Hawaii.
Yes, I taught with the delinquency control project. I think I started teaching the second year program. It was a program that was financed in part by the Ford Foundation, and our university sponsored it. People like Al Feldman and I think who else, Dan Pursuit, so forth, are some of the early organizers of the program. Norris Class and I were teachers in the program, and it was a program that still continues on this campus, in which they bring in juvenile police from all over the world, largely from the States, but we've had them from any number of foreign countries during the several years that I taught, and I taught them courses in human development. And the interesting thing was the resistance to the type of material I was teaching from policemen. If I'd not had some experience of teaching in the military, I think I would have probably left the first day. They didn't want to believe the kinds of things that I was saying, and often want me to prove this or prove that. But interestingly, at the end of each session, when the students evaluate courses, the two people who got the highest evaluations were Norrie Class and me, social workers. And many of their own teachers were from their own departments, and high-ranking police officers and so forth. And an interesting thing, too, is a number of them came personally wanting help with their own children or with their own family problems of different kinds. And one who protested the most became a chief of police in one of the Bay Area's cities, and he was lividly against social workers, and his daughter was killed at a later time in an auto accident, and he came to us for help when this happened, and has since been a very loyal supporter of social work.
You've done a great deal in study and evaluation and consultation with children's agencies. Could you tell us something about going out to the Queen's Trust in Hawaii and what happened there?
Yes, I'd forgotten about that trip. That in Hawaii they were eager to have different training programs made, and I've gone several times to do different things, and usually it's been sponsored by the McInerney Fund there or the Queen's Trust in Hawaii. And I think the thing you're referring to was a McInerney study of a project that had been established over there by some prominent businessmen on the Big Island. And it was a project of working with delinquent boys, and is called the Citizenship Training Group, and it was highly creative, and they wanted me to come over and evaluate it so they could present the program to the legislature and try to get it statewide. And I spent my whole one Christmas vacation, I think in the 1963 or 4, over there doing the study, and I think some of you who lived in Hawaii or here recognize that it's hard to work in Hawaii. They want you to be entertained all the time. But I did get the study out in 2 weeks. But in this study, they were largely working with kids who lived back in the backwoods part of the island, who were really primitive in their lives in many kinds of ways. And it was largely socially introducing them to new kinds of experiences that they could have that would socialize them. And I was given a interpreter because almost all the interviews were in Pidgin English on their side, and I was given an interpreter while I was there. And often after I'd interviewed a family or the youngsters, they would give me a gift. I would leave like a big gunny sack full of pineapples, and always had to kiss all the ladies before you left. And so it was an enjoyable experience.
Then I think you went out to Phoenix and participated in a big study there with Wayne McMillan, and got somewhat into the girls' institution and had a kind of an interesting incident at the convent of the Good Shepherd.
I remember well. Yes, the Phoenix community asked for a general community study to be made to reorganize their social services, and this was to be headed by Dr. Wayne McMillan from the University of Chicago, and I was asked to participate in the study. Blythe Francis from Family Service here was also on the study team, and we were brought to Phoenix to spend a number of days looking into the practice of the institutions and the structure of institutions, and write our report and present it to some of the leaders of Phoenix. And the one instance you referred to, was, I was sent out to study the convent of the Good Shepherd, which was located out of town in Phoenix, and it was an institution that cared for delinquent girls. They did not have a state institution for them. They contracted with the Catholic agency to do this. So I had to go out by taxi, and got out in the country and dismissed the taxi and go up to these huge walls and knock on the gate and ring a bell and wait, and finally I hear footprints coming across the tiles, and a little door opens and peeks out, and find what I wanted. I explained why I was there. I was sure that all preparations for my coming had been made through the channels, but they hadn't been, and I couldn't come in. There I was stranded in the country, so I hitchhiked back to Phoenix, and feeling a bit miffed because our time was particularly limited. But I discussed it with Dr. McMillan. We went to the high officials of the church, and I was told to return the next day, and the gates opened widely to me, and I was given opportunity to learn about program, and the sisters gave me a big chicken lunch, and they were not allowed to be seated with me traditionally, so I sat at this huge table with all of them standing waiting on me, and it compensated for the day before. But I was always interested that they wanted to present their best foot forward, because we'd walk through the dormitories where the girls lived. You would see some of the crucifixes banged up and things broken within the dormitory, and the sister would always explain that there'd been an earth tremor, or that something had happened. And I'd worked in residential treatment, and I know what kids can do to buildings and to the decor and so forth.
One of the big things that's happened, I think, in this period of time we're looking at was the war on poverty. And one of the big things in the war on poverty that still carries on and has really been a success was Operation Headstart. And John, you had a big role to play in starting up Headstart here in LA?
Yes, our School of Social Work inherited this responsibility from the School of Education. The university had been asked to do the Head Start training programs in this area, and they'd asked the School of Education to do it, and the Dean of Education didn't approve of Head Start. and turned it down, and President Topping wanted very much for it to be done on the campus, and so came to our school to ask, and I was assigned the responsibility of heading the Head Start training. And I needed to get teachers from various disciplines to participate in the training, and that necessitated my dealing with the Dean of Education and trying to appease him. But I must say that he finally gave me names of two just excellent teachers who participated. And we held sessions, I think, for a period of about 2 years and training Head Start people. And some of our graduates became active in Head Start programs at a later time. And I found it a valuable experience, and often met with Head Start people in the succeeding years.
I know Jo Yelder has made her mark in Head Start, and that the whole push now is to really enlarge on Head Start and really carry on with it. One of the things that's happened is that I think we've really come into an age of electronics in these years, and electronics has come into its own. Here we are, microphone in hand and tape running, I guess. Would you say something about these aids, so-called audiovisual devices in social work education and in the broader field, conferences and so forth?
Well, I thought I was an innovator of these a few years ago, but today I can't operate anything that they make. But I think I had one of the first tape recorders in Los Angeles, and it was an enormous machine that was very hard to carry, and I felt it had a value in teaching practice courses particularly. And I remember taking it, I think in about 1947 or 8, taking it to a meeting that was held at the Family Service Agency in Los Angeles to demonstrate the use of tapes and to discuss some of the ethical responsibilities in taping. And I upset one of the women social workers there, said that I was unethical to use a machine like this, that I should be run out of the profession, and she got up and marched out of the meeting. And I have since found the use of both audio and visual tapes to be very valuable teaching aids. I do think sometimes they're overly used, and I think it's awfully important to appropriately use these. And that I think social work needs more to look at what they can do visually. And this past, I think it was 2 years ago, I made 4 training films for the County Department of Public Welfare. They were each hour films made on full-size movie films and then transferred to audio tapes. I think more of this kind of thing needs to be done by social workers, and I'd like to see more done in social work by social workers in the commercial field of interpreting our profession to lay people or to other professionals. That there've been some efforts. I remember a number of years ago, Melvin Walder, the screenwriter, asked me to collaborate with him in working on some of the dialogue for a film that Ida Lupino was producing and acting in, and she was starring a new star named Mala Powers, and it dealt with a situation in which a woman working in a factory is raped on her way home from work, and this story dealt with the handling of her emotional needs following this incident. And so I worked carefully with Malvin Walden, preparing dialogue that I thought was appropriate by our professional judgments. And the manuscript was submitted to the Hayes office, and their response was that they could use the dialogue as it was, but that it wasn't right for a social worker to be saying these things, that it would have to be a minister. And so the leading male character, who was to have been a social worker, was changed to a minister, and what they did was looked for a Navy chaplain who had just gotten out of the Navy and was not in clerical uniform but in Navy uniform as the leading man. And I think sort of attested to the attitudes and feelings that so much of community has about social workers, that we really don't have a right to, in many ways, make statements and judgments about life and have them portrayed.
Do you think that's changed at all since this film?
Yes, but I don't see many social workers well portrayed in films, and they're, I've forgotten which actor at one time, George C. Scott was making a series, and the ones who killed that series, I'm told, were the social workers ourselves, that there were so many complaints written in by the social workers on the ways in which the cases were handled, and not giving any dramatic right to the behaviors that were demonstrated. And the writers of that program used professional advice from social workers while it was being produced. But I felt it was very unfortunate, and every profession needs to allow some dramatic right to a writer to, otherwise it would never entertain.
When school was out for the summer, John was always flitting off, usually and mostly to New Orleans, and had a dual career at the Tulane University, where I think he's permanent professor of social work. Tell us about some of your experiences at Tulane, John.
Well, to spend time in the South when you've been raised in the West is always a great learning experience. And at Tulane, I had students, I think, from almost every southern state each summer, and many from eastern states, because Tulane University has always had a exceptionally successful summer program in social work. And Nori Class was a fellow teacher at Tulane, and we were there together, I think, for as many as 18 summers. And Dr. Otto Pollack from the University of Pennsylvania then, and then Bryn Mawr was also with us, so we became sort of a trilogy team of teaching there. And in the morning we did our serious work, in the night we went to the jazz sessions. And this was one of the pleasures of going to New Orleans. The one thing I remember particularly, that the first year I was there, I recognized that there were no black students in any of the classes, and I saw none of them on campus. And I made inquiry and found that they just had not admitted black students to Tulane. But the following year, I was asked to give a public lecture, and where community would be invited, and I called one of our black graduates from USC who lived and worked in New Orleans, and asked her if she was coming, and she said, "I'm sorry that I can't." I said, "Could you tell me why?" Well, she said, "I can't come onto campus. I can't come into the building. And I went to the dean to say that I would not give the lecture if that was the case. And he said that the school, this is Dean Kindlesberger, the school was trying to get changes legally so that the buildings that originally had been given the money had a stipulation that there would be no blacks in those buildings, and that this had to be legally changed, and that he would move me to a different place for the lecture, and which I gave, and our graduate came with some friends, but sat in the back row of the auditorium where I spoke. Interestingly, the following year, when I walked into my class, there were at least 6 or 7 black students. And at the end of the session, when I came out, there were some reporters waiting, one from the London Times, asking could they interview the students, the black students, as some of the first to be accepted in the university. I asked the students would they be willing, and they were. And so I guess an article appeared in the Picayune of New Orleans. And within 2 or 3 years, whenever you went to the student union there, you would see black and white students socializing much as they do on our campus. And it was a part of history to see that.